Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about botanical history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is May 23rd. Today in garden history, we celebrate the birthday of Carl Linnaeus, the Swedish botanist, zoologist, taxonomist, and physician. Carl was a fan of flowers early on in his life. As a young child, whenever he was upset, his mother gave him flowers to soothe him. On May 1st, 1753, the publication of his masterpiece, Species Plantarum, changed plant taxonomy forever. It gave Linnaeus the moniker of Father of Taxonomy, and his naming system is called binomial nomenclature. Binomial means two names, which in the naming game includes the plant's genus, which is capitalized or could be abbreviated by its first letter, and the species, or specific epithet, which is all lowercase and can be abbreviated SP. And if you're having trouble remembering taxonomy, I like to think of it through the lens of people names. So the given name and the surname of a person, but in reverse order. Genus first, then species. Now, the names that Linnaeus assigned to plants live on unchanged, and they are distinguished by a capital L after their name. It was Linnaeus himself who once said, "God created, Linnaeus ordered." Well, there are so many stories about Carl Linnaeus, but I thought I'd share just a few of the more obscure stories about him and his work in honor of his birthday. First, Linnaeus's friend Anders Celsius created the centigrade thermometer in 1742. Now, Anders set it up so that water would boil at 0 degrees and freeze at 100. 3 years later, it was Carl Linnaeus who reversed the scale, sharing it in an article with the Botanical Garden at Uppsala University. Second, there is a memorable story about Linnaeus regarding the genus Camelina, the genus for the Asiatic dayflower. Now, Carl Linnaeus named the genus after the three Camelin brothers, two of whom achieved greatness in botany, and the other died young before achieving anything in life. Linnaeus wrote this about the Camelina. Camelina has 3 petals, 2 of which are showy, where the third is not conspicuous. Well, the next time you see the Camelina communis, or the Asiatic dayflower, with 2 large blue petals, just a beautiful blue, and 1 very small white petal, you can think of the Camelin brothers and Linnaeus's kind commemoration of the 3 brothers. And incidentally, I always get Asiatic dayflower growing in and around my water feature because this is a plant that loves wet feet and it loves the moisture around the water feature. And this plant is super invasive for me, but I always tell the story about the naming of this plant to my student gardeners, and it really resonates with them. It sticks with them, and they love that little story about the 2 overachieving brothers and then the third brother that died young. It's a great way to remember the name of that plant. And then finally, the last story that I wanted to share today about Linnaeus involved a trip that he took to Lapland when he was 25 years old. Carl spent nearly 6 months there, and he came back with tales about a Scandinavia that few people knew existed. Now, this trip was very trying for Carl Linnaeus. He was hungry. He had to deal with mosquitoes, even way up in Scandinavia. There were, of course, freezing temperatures, and he almost died from a rock slide and a gunshot. But through it all, Carl Linnaeus fell in love with the Lapland. And he even brought home a traditional costume, complete with a magical drum from a shaman as a souvenir from his adventure. Now, 5 years after this trip, an obscure German painter named Martin Hoffmann painted Linnaeus's portrait. And guess what he chose to wear for the sitting? That's right, his Lapland costume, of course. And so in Hoffmann's Linnaeus, this portrait that I've seen at least 100 times, a 30-year-old Carl Linnaeus is wearing boots made of reindeer skin, and he's also wearing an early version of a tool belt. And then suspended from that tool belt is the magical drum from a shaman, a needle to make nets, a snuff box, a cartridge box, and a knife. He's also wearing traditional Laplander gloves. And then don't forget this little detail. In his right hand, he holds his favorite plant, the twin flower, and the only flower named for him, the Linnea borealis, the twin flower. And today we also celebrate the birthday of the English poet, author, and humorist Thomas Hood, who was born on this day, May 23rd, in 1799. Thomas is most remembered for his poems The Bridge of Sighs and The Song of the Shirt. But I thought I would share 2 personal favorites with you today. Here's an excerpt from his poem called Song. "'Tis like the birthday of the world, when earth was born in bloom. The light is made of many dyes, the air is all perfume. There's crimson buds and white and blue, the very rainbow showers have turned to blossoms where they fell, and sown the earth with flowers." And finally, here's my all-time favorite Thomas Hood poem, and it's called simply No. No warmth, no cheerfulness, no healthful ease, no comfortable feel in any member, no shade, no shine, no butterflies, no bees, no fruits, no flowers, no leaves, no birds, November. And today we celebrate the birthday of Georgiana Molloy, the English-Australian pioneer and one of the first botanical collectors in Western Australia. She was born on this day, May 23rd, in 1805. Georgiana's life in the 1830s in Western Australia was one of extreme hardship. Her first child died shortly after it was born, and her only son ended up drowned in a well. And after these events, she naturally struggled to find joy in her life. But in 1836, at the end of the year, she received a letter from a man named James Mangles. He was an officer in the Royal Navy, a naturalist, horticulturist, and writer. And he asked Georgiana for help. And his request for botanical specimens gave her life new meaning. Now, James had made arrangements for a number of people to collect for him in Australia. He was very strategic in that regard. But it also meant that James was uniquely qualified to review the work done by collectors in Western Australia before 1850. And James was a huge fan of Georgiana's work. He once wrote, "Georgiana's collections were full of pressed plants that were mounted and set out with delicacy and precision and carefully numbered, showing great evidence of care and cleanliness in the sorting." And Georgiana would have been delighted to know that many of the seeds she collected were sent to botanists and horticulturists all over the world, and they were found to be especially viable. Sadly, Georgiana's life was cut short at the age of 37. After giving birth to her 7th child, she suffered for 4 months, from December of 1842 until her death on April 8th the following spring. And when the English naturalist George Wales learned of the death of Georgiana Molloy, he reached out to the man who inspired her love for botany, James Mangles, and he wrote, Not one in 10,000 who go out to distant lands has done what she did for the gardens of her native country. And it was on this day, May 23rd in 1905, that Louisa Yeomans King recorded this entry in her garden diary, which became her book, The Flower Garden Day by Day. Louisa wrote, "Sow seed now of the beautiful pale yellow Oenothera afterglow, or evening primrose, at the back of the border near Physostegia virginiana, obedient plant, which of course is now considered not to be obedient and is definitely regarded as an invasive. So keep that in mind." And then she writes, "A group of these two, so the evening primrose and obedient plant, with Artemisia lactiflora, or white mugwort, and the little annual sunflower known as Primrose stella, will make August well worth waiting for." And I love this entry because it's a little gardener's time capsule about how Louisa was thinking about her fall garden way back in May on this day in 1905. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, The Less is More Garden by Susan Morrison. And yes, this is a book for small space gardening. This book came out in 2018, and the subtitle is Big Ideas for Designing Your Small Yard. And right off the bat, when I saw the cover, I knew that I was going to love Susan's book. And if you have a small garden, you should definitely give this one a look. And you know, most people are small space gardeners. In fact, Susan writes, "In my practice as a landscape designer, most of the backyards that I design measure less than 2,500 square feet, and layouts are rarely more than 40 by 60 feet. I no longer think of that as small. It has become standard." Interestingly, while active gardeners are often concerned with fitting in everything into a space that's generally smaller than the backyards that they grew up in, I am just as likely to hear from homeowners more interested in creating a space that will be as simple as possible to maintain. No one wants another to-do list item, but most of us want a backyard that's a refuge. And the shift in how we live, work, and play is what led me to develop the less is more approach to garden design and outdoor living. And so there you go. And so really quickly, I want to share with you what Susan defines as her less is more garden approach. And she writes, "At its heart, this approach to garden design means less space, more enjoyment, less effort, more beauty, less maintenance, more relaxation, and finally, less gardening by the numbers, more you." This book is 225 pages of small garden design with the less is more approach. You'll find practical and helpful advice along with inspirational photography and many creative and unexpected tricks to help you get the small space garden of your dreams. You can get a copy of The Less is More Garden by Susan Morrison and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $18. Finally, we end the show today with a remembrance. It was on this day, May 23rd, last year in 2021, that the American illustrator and writer Eric Carle passed away. Eric had a wide-ranging knowledge and love of nature. His early books include Nature Thoughts, Flower Thoughts, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, and The Tiny Seed. And I couldn't resist sharing a quote from Eric's most memorable work, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. On Saturday, he ate through one piece of chocolate cake, one ice cream cone, one pickle, one slice of Swiss cheese, one slice of salami, one lollipop, one piece of cherry pie, one sausage, one cupcake, and one slice of watermelon. And that night, he had a stomachache. And it was Eric Carle who said, "Whatever our eyes touch should be beautiful." And in 2007, Eric Carle gave a commencement address at Bates College. He concluded with these words: "Love your partner and tend your garden. Simplify. Slow down. Be kind." Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to The Daily Gardener. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.